Hello everyone. So, for any of you who play TF2 around Halloween time, you'll notice there's actually a Halloween version of Sunshine. And outside of all the normal differences you'd expect from a Halloween map, such as, different textures, darker skybox, whatnot, crit pumpkins spawn all the time, Halloween mode is very fun. But one of the big things you'll notice is that the actual map is not just a retexture, and there are differences, gameplay differences, and it's a older version of Sunshine as far as I'm aware. But one of the big things you'll notice as far as the gameplay differences is that there are multiple death pits. There's one isolating the pack under the midpoint. And on second, there's actually a new health pack off the side of a cliff that, in this current version, is fenced off, which is quite interesting. And actually, as an aside, there was a Sin Shine event played with some invite players. I don't know if it was a charity event or just something. It was just a for fun, teams playing on Sin Shine, doing all sorts of wacky stuff. And there was a Cloak and Dagger spy doing the Cloak and Dagger spy thing of, sitting on the health pack in order to body block someone who tries to jump across the pit, and it worked, so that was very funny. However, this is an interesting distinction, and I raise this example because if you look at any other Sixes map, Sunshine is not a Sixes map, to be clear, but every single Sixes map that gets played, not a single one of them has any map hazards. Now, map hazards are kind of funny in a casual setting, of course, because, you... I mean, isn't there an entire Germa video or something where he's just spectating Sawmill and all the chaos of people just running into the saw blades and whatnot? And of course, it's funny when, the train horns are blaring, but people are still on the tracks anyway and just get run over by a train on any of the maps that feature trains. So all of this is definitely adds to some of the charm of the game and makes things interesting in a casual setting. But they are very intentionally left out in Sixes. And curiously enough as well, map hazards and cliffs and whatnot are absolutely present in Highlander maps. So even in some competitive formats we have them, but not Sixes. And why is that? Well, that's what I'd like to talk about today, but also kind of talk about what that would look like. So for starters, I honestly don't think that map hazards would change much gameplay-wise. There aren't... Fortunately, the amount of movement negating mechanics are pretty minimal. There are absolutely ways to influence your opponent's movement and positioning. Obviously, just the big one, doing damage, is going to knock people around. But that's not usually something you can manipulate to your will, not so much, because, of course, people can just strafe the damage in any one direction and not get knocked off of stuff and whatnot. But there are absolutely movement negating mechanics like Air Blast, which, as an aside, man, the fact that Air Blast just completely erases your strafing keys is so annoying. But yeah, so by and large, I don't think that map hazards and like cliffs and whatnot would make a huge difference. But people definitely, at least Sixes players, would prefer playing without them. I mean, for starters, it's just kind of an unsatisfying way to die in a competitive setting, because, you are just... This is where I'm looking for. I don't know, even if you don't... Even if it's not from, like, teammate or enemy input, even if it's, like, barely from enemy input, it's just kind of frustrating to just get one-shot by things. I think, in general, TF2 is balanced very well around the fact that at full HP, there's very little that can kill you. Mostly being, a sniper, a crits charge, a sticky trap. And at least in the case of, like, a sticky trap, you know, you are in control ultimately, because, you know, you don't have to walk through a doorway. And if you suspect it's trapped, basically, like, you know, you still have a lot of agency in the situation. A crits, that's, again, just a matter of the other team trying to counterplay you, and, you know, do their own thing. And you can expect the crits in situations where you might expect it, or just spotting and whatnot can accomplish things quite well. Sniper, definitely a little more frustrating to die to. But in general, most damage is gonna be pretty predictable. So yeah, there's definitely some personal, or by personal, like community preference against these map hazards. They just don't really contribute much. They make things interesting. And by interesting, I mean like funny, for more casual players, of course. But by and large, it's not too much of a consideration. Now, that being said, what would map hazards look like? Would, you know, how people play the game be any different at all? And we can actually just use Sunshine as an example. You know, for example, if Sunshine used the same map hazards as Sinshine, that being, again, the pit under the point and the cliff on second, you know, how would the map change? Well, for starters, on mid, it would definitely make things different, because under the point is definitely a place that people route to a lot. And during a mid fight, that is really the only pack that's still, like, in the mid. So it's not uncommon, especially for, like, scouts to be routing under the point. Just grab that pack, get, like, an extra 40 HP or something, and then continue the fight. Or using that positioning as a kind of flank option, just to get deep in enemy territory during like a double soldier bomb commit or something to that effect. So it does see a lot of use as real estate, right? And introducing a pit there definitely makes things a little more complicated, because not only do you have to actually like jump and be at risk of things, but any amount of like chip damage, even like a player monitoring that, might very easily just disrupt your jump and then you fall to your death. So that would definitely be a far less used area of the map. And same thing goes to on second. Now, it's not too standard for a team or players to be standing in that corner. Sometimes during like crazy sack attempts, or even just post-fight shenanigans or whatever, a medic might find themselves like kind of backed up into that corner. But I don't think in any of those cases then like knocking people off would be exploitable necessarily. But again, you just have to be way more careful about going there, which is kind of curious. So now, of course, I suppose the elephant in the room for some people might be like, hey, wouldn't that make Pyro more viable, because you get to actually air blast people off these cliffs? And, you know, in Highlander, you definitely see that, where, you know, players have to be really careful standing where they are if the other team, you know, has a Pyro ready to just air blast 3 people off and get an insta-kill or whatever. So not really. Like I don't think you'd see much more Pyro usage if there were map hazards. I mean, it of course depends on the map. Like in the case of second, it's not too uncommon for a team, and man, I say that so often, it's not too uncommon or whatever. I mean, I just like to talk about, I don't like to super theory craft necessarily, and actually talk in examples that you see, and I just need more diverse phrasing for that. But something you do see is if a team is down multiple players, especially if those players are important, like if they're down a demo and a soldier, then it's, oh, I almost said it again, then you might see a team holding that corner by shutter, you know, in the direction of that cliff, in order to bait an exchange. So if the other team tries to push out with those really good picks, then they end up just eating an Uber exchange, and then the other team, of course, is buying time for their spawners to show up and roll out and whatnot, and hopefully not have to give up the point off that disadvantage, right? However, you know, that you could maybe make the case for playing a Pyro in that situation, and just air blasting their entire combo off the cliff. which even Uber will not save them from. That is certainly possible, and especially off of last. You know, it's very convenient to switch on and off of Pyro. But I think for most cases, you wouldn't really see these full-time off-class being used. And I don't think that introducing certain map hazards would make that more common, unless the way that people held points or whatnot was very vulnerable to something like that. So yeah, I don't think you would necessarily... Maybe even like Force of Nature you might see a little more of. But by and large, I don't think people would play the game much differently. They would just avoid these areas in which they could instantly die. And I suppose, you know, just starting this, I didn't really have a strong reason for why these don't exist outside of, like, player preference. However, as I talk about it more, I'm starting to kind of figure that, by and large, the way that people play around these map hazards and these insta-kill factors on the map are to just not engage with them. So by, you know, introducing some death pit somewhere, you're not really making... You're not increasing the options that players have, necessarily. You're not really making things more interesting. In fact, you're just making an area that players now avoid. Which, yeah. Like, and you can see in the case of many different, like, death pits and map hazards and whatnot, there's actually, like, health packs and whatnot placed in those positions in order to lure players in. Because, you know, without that, there's really no reason to go there. And depending on how dangerous these hazards are, you'd need pretty strong lures to bring players in. So in general, yeah, you're kind of just introducing areas or elements to the map that players just don't engage with and try to avoid if they can afford to. Which, in a competitive setting, is actually not that great, because you would like players to be able to exploit and explore the full area of the map, right? Even if it is just a boring corner or something. The fact that a player is cornered there is something that people can play around and do whatever. So yeah, map hazards, something that is pretty common on most casual maps, but is noticeably lacking on all the competitive maps, which is an interesting little topic, just something to think about. And yeah, don't really have much else to talk about. Short topic. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and see you next time.